From Russia, if you're listening, to Ukraine, take out Joe Biden for me, will ya? Donald Trump making clear that he can't win the presidency without foreign interference and doesn't have any interest in trying. Donald Trump essentially confessing to the conduct in question, admitting that he urged the Ukrainians to investigate Joe Biden, and all but confessing to connecting U.S. aid dollars, or in Trump's words, money, to the request to investigate Biden. Here he is, first on what he discussed on a July phone call with the Ukrainian president.
The conversation I had was largely congratulatory, was largely corruption, all of the corruption taking place, was largely the fact that we don't want our people, like Vice President Biden and his son, creating to the corruption already in the Ukraine.
Important to note, Trump is making a wholly unsubstantiated claim when he alleges corruption by the Bidens. There is no evidence of any wrongdoing. In reality, Joe Biden was the one working to purge corruption from Ukraine, and Trump is the one ordering foreign intervention in presidential politics. And here's Trump seeming to confirm what we know from press accounts about the whistleblower complaint that put this entire scandal into motion, that Trump tied a promise to a foreign leader to something of urgent concern.
It's very important to talk about corruption. If you don't talk about corruption, why would you give money to a country that you think is corrupt? One of the reasons the new president got elected is he was going to stop corruption. So it's very important that on occasion you speak to somebody about corruption. Very important.
Though he'd go on to deny promising military aid in exchange for a Biden investigation, Trump came awfully close to confessing to the entire conspiracy in plain sight, urging a foreign leader to meddle in the U.S. election and suggesting he would not give money to a country that hadn't properly investigated corruption. Except in this case, the corruption is fabricated by Trump and Giuliani, and the conduct in question is Trump's solicitation of election interference from Ukraine. It came the day after Robert Mueller testified about the Russian attack on our 2016 election. The Washington Post writes it this way, quote, when the July 24th congressional testimony of special counsel Robert Mueller deflated the impeachment hopes of Democrats, President Trump crowed no collusion and claimed vindication from accusations that he had conspired with Russia in the 2016 election. Then, the very next day, Trump allegedly sought to collude with another foreign country in the coming election, pressing Ukrainian President Zelensky to dig up what he believed would be damaging information about one of his leading Democratic challengers. And that is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. With us from the New York Times, White House correspondent Annie Carney, former chief of staff to Vice Presidents Joe Biden and Al Gore, now an advisor to the Biden campaign, Ron Klain. With us at the table, former Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill, former federal prosecutor Paul Butler, David Jolly didn't make it, but he's still in here. If he shows up, we'll bring him in. And Chief Public Affairs Officer for MoveOn.org, Karine Jean-Pierre. Annie Carney, let me start with you. Donald Trump seeming to confirm everything that your newspaper and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal has reported since Friday, basically that Donald Trump called the code red. Donald Trump asked the Ukrainians to investigate Joe Biden.
I mean, he hasn't issued a firm denial of any of it, down to a tweet. He tweeted about the Wall Street Journal had reported that 8 times in that July 25th phone call, he asked Ukraine to investigate Biden. And he tweeted about that today, calling it fake news, but he didn't issue a clear denial. One thing that we as journalists need to press him on today as he makes his rounds at the UN is, on that phone call, did he directly tie that foreign aid to an investigation of a political rival at home? That's what we still need clarity on from him. And he does a lot of talking these days in front of reporters and a lot of pool sprays. So that's something that we really need to push him on to get a more specific answer.
Paul Butler, that's an important thing to know if there was a quid pro quo. But it would seem we already have what we had in 2016. Here's a graphic of how the Ukrainian effort at election interference is already worse than the Russian attempt, which put in motion a special counsel, a 22-month investigation. So on the Russia probe, Russia approached the Trump campaign. In this instance, it was Donald Trump who approached Ukraine. The Russia investigation examined a lot of contacts, 150 contacts, mostly among aides and advisors with the Russians. In this instance, what is public-facing is Trump and Rudy Giuliani driving a Ukrainian Oppo operation. In the Russia investigation, the Mueller report cites Donald Trump Jr.'s ignorance of the laws and of accepting foreign aid. Post-Mueller, the whole country is educated in the illegality of election interference. In the Russia investigation, he was a candidate. Now with Ukraine, Trump is the American president, has the office of the presidency. And the question in the Russia probe was about sanctions relief. Here, it's an open question, as Andy Carney just said, about a quid pro quo with foreign aid and military aid.
Yeah, so we've seen this movie before. Trump tried to bully the Ukrainians into messing with our democracy. He tried to get a foreign national to help him win election to the Oval Office. And he's on notice that that's illegal. It's a violation of federal campaign laws to solicit a thing of value, including opposition research from a foreign national. Mueller says that in his report. Mueller says one reason he didn't charge anyone with that crime is because at that point it wasn't clear that it was a crime, that it was illegal. Now he's on notice. And as you point out, Nicole, it's worse this time because he's sitting in the Oval Office bargaining with foreign leaders, holding up $250 million in foreign aid and defense aid to the Ukrainians in a conversation where he's mentioning Biden 8 times. And remember, Michael Cohen, if you want to talk about a quid pro quo, remember Michael Cohen testified to Congress. That's not how Trump, he doesn't say it directly. He doesn't say, okay, I'm going to bribe you, but he makes it clear what he wants you to do. I don't know, maybe by mentioning Biden 8 times in a conversation with the Ukrainian president, and at the same time he's saying, unless you do this corruption investigation, you're not going to get your $250 million.
You know, Claire, there's no one to blame but the person who did this, and that's Donald Trump. But has there been a culture of permissiveness? Robert Mueller delivered a report that didn't clearly come out and articulate whether crimes have been committed or not. There was a confusing conclusion on obstruction, 150 contacts with Russians, but not wrapped in a clear message of whether crimes have been committed. Nancy Pelosi put impeachment off the table from go. The day after the Mueller testimony, Donald Trump gets on the phone and solicits election meddling from the Ukraine.
I'm not sure that anything Congress does or doesn't do has much impact on this guy. He clearly is using, I mean, there's 2 or 3 things here. First, let me add a jury with this. I used to do circumstantial arson cases. There is so much circumstantial evidence here. He was withholding the aid.
Right.
I mean, Congress was complaining, why aren't you getting Ukraine the money we have appropriated to them? He was stopping. I mean, one of the things they've got to do is they've got to dig through and see if they can get close to the finger that pointed, that said, hold that aid. I'm betting if we could get there, it would in fact be Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani saying, let's hold the aid, put pressure on them to go after Biden in a way that will help in your election. Clearly illegal, clearly a felony, and he thinks executive privilege and classified information is a tool to allow him to break the law.
Well, let me key off something you just said, if we can get there. How do we get there? I mean, it was Rod Rosenstein who essentially threw up his hands after Andy McCabe had opened up a Russia investigation into the president. Sessions was recused. He appointed Robert Mueller. We've now got Bill Barr there, who is entirely comfortable using the Justice Department to shield Donald Trump from any legal scrutiny. But there is no, I mean, if there are concerns that a crime was committed, couldn't the Intelligence Community Inspector General refer that to DOJ or the FBI for a criminal referral for investigation?
I think the IG has, this is a Trump-appointed IG. I mean, that is not mentioned often enough. Right. This guy was appointed by Donald Trump. He's the one that says this is an urgent matter. Right. Under the statute, the whistleblower's claims should be reported to Congress. If that breaks, then the IG is going to have little faith in saying, hey, DOJ, do something. Because guess who told him not to send this stuff to Congress? DOJ. They're the ones he called. I mean, they gave it to DNI, and then DNI called DOJ, and DOJ said no.
Shut it down.
Shut it down. So what's going to happen here is the courts are going to have to begin weighing in on a wide variety of subjects. And I think legally they are in a worse position on this matter than they are on almost anything else that Congress is taking them to court on, because this statute is pretty clear. And what you would have to decide is The statute protects the president even if he's behaving with criminal behavior.
Ron Klain, Joe Biden called late Friday for the transcripts, all the transcripts to be released of Donald Trump's conversations with the Ukrainians, which we know to be from Annie Carney's colleagues reporting at the center of the whistleblower complaint, that which caused, as Claire said, urgent concern from the Trump-appointed IC Intelligence Community IG Inspector General. What else can Biden do? I mean, does Biden still have bipartisan relationships in the U.S. Senate to call on the Senate Intelligence Committee or Foreign Relations Committee to demand some more transparency?
Well, look, I think Vice President Biden's doing what he can do, which is speaking out and making clear what went wrong. Look, it's up to Congress to decide if it's going to fulfill its constitutional responsibility.
Haven't they already decided? No, thank you.
Well, I don't think so. Nicole, I think this could be a game changer in that. I really do. I think that, your graphic before, I think, really laid out why, in many ways, this is much worse than what happened with Russia. The idea that in 2016, maybe Trump didn't know what he was doing, maybe he wasn't going to be president, whatever. He is president. He's in the Oval Office. This is money Congress said should go to Ukraine for an urgent security concern, the incursions of Donald Trump's friends in Russia. Trump withheld that aid. We don't know why. We also don't even really know what's fully in the whistleblower report. I think there's been great reporting that it related to this call, but maybe there's even more than this call. We just don't know how far this really goes. And I think Congress has to decide that it is going to issue the subpoenas, that it is going to go to court, enforce those subpoenas, and is going to get to the bottom of this, because this is an abuse of power by the president that really ranks up there. I mean, I don't think it's melodramatic to compare it to Watergate. I think it does compare to Watergate. It might even be worse, because after all, Richard Nixon didn't go and break into the Watergate himself. This is Trump himself abusing his power to invite foreign interference in our elections. We need to get to the bottom of it.
Karine, color me cautiously optimistic, I guess, that the sort of landscape is shifted. I don't know that I see it yet. What do you see?
It doesn't seem like the landscape has shifted. It should be shifting. I think this is a big kind of flag that Congress needs to be looking at and acting on. Look, the thing that I look at with this is the timing, right? This happened after the call, the call to the Ukraine president happened after the Mueller testimony, right? And so after Donald Trump saw that Congress was not going to act on his past crimes, he clearly started committing new crimes. Right. And it is absurd here, because we have to remember that our founding fathers knew this was going to happen, right? They knew there was going to be a Donald Trump. And so they put a remedy in the Constitution so that someone like a Donald Trump could be stopped. And it's just absurd that Congress is not acting. This is not a popularity contest. This is not a beauty pageant. We're talking about their constitutional duty. We have Donald Trump, who truly believes he is above the law. Period. Full stop. He's obstructing Congress. He's obstructing justice. And he's not going to stop unless Congress steps up and stops him.
One thing that was remarkable, Annie Carney, this weekend is the way he's turned the entire cabinet into his personal propaganda machine. I think we're all conditioned to see Rudy Giuliani on cable news making these outlandish claims, getting ahead of the Michael Cohen hush money scheme for the porn star, getting ahead, throwing sand in the gears of the Mueller probe. But it was startling to see the country's Treasury Secretary and Secretary of State echoing Rudy's message. Let's watch.
If it's the case that there was something going on with the president or his family that caused a conflict of interest, and Vice President Biden behaved in a way that was inconsistent with the way leaders ought to operate, I think the American people deserve to know that.
What I do find is inappropriate is the fact that Vice President Biden at the time's son did very significant business dealings in Ukraine. I, for one, find that to be concerning. And to me, that's the issue perhaps that should be further investigated.
Annie Carney, just a stunning, Donald Trump likes to call his GOP primary opponents the Three Stooges. Rudy, Mnuchin, and Pompeo seem like a better fit. But what do you make of the fact that he's using the week of UNGA, his Secretary of State, to sort of puppet these unsubstantiated allegations against a potential 2020 opponent?
Well, one thing is, I mean, if this White House has not been organized enough to send out talking points to the administration officials going out on the Sunday issues in a long time. But it certainly sounded like they were reading from a similar script on Sunday, where both Pompeo and Mnuchin said it would create a bad precedent to release the transcript of this call, and really poured cold water on that. Even while allies on the Hill, like Lindsey Graham, were saying that it would be helpful to look at that transcript and to have it released. And then they were turning this story around and saying, like, the real story here is Biden, which is the Giuliani line all along. This is not surprising. These two would be these are the top tier administration officials. These are the ones that Trump trusts the most. These are the ones that are with him at UNGA this week in New York. So it makes sense that they were out there on the Sunday shows and that they were left with the task of defending the president. It's why many administrations have refused to go on the Sunday shows throughout the years, because it's often a thankless task when you get a newsy week like this. For someone like Mike Pompeo, it will be interesting to see how these comments play out in 4 years. He's someone who is widely thought to have presidential ambitions, and we'll see how he tries to distance himself from Donald Trump later when he's running for his own candidacy. So we'll see.
I understand Andy Carney has to stare at the trees every day, and so it's unsurprising. It's shocking. It's like Access Hollywood Weekend shocking to see the country's Secretary of State. Secretaries of State usually stay far, far away from a president's domestic scandals, and this is a domestic political scandal. He asked a foreign leader to dig up dirt on the front runner's kid. This was debasing the Secretary of State, debasing the Department of the Treasury, and to see them was beyond surprising, was shocking.
And by the way, clearly he was ordered to do this because he's a good enough talker. All he had to do was pivot and say, you know what I'm focused on? We have a tinderbox in the Middle East. We've got a very important week at the UN. And everyone would have understood that he would just pivot away from that and go directly to what most of the world is talking about.
The buffoon in chief practically started a, global economic slowdown with his, trigger-happy trade war with China, so I'm otherwise distracted. To see those two smearing the Bidens was shocking to me.
Will anybody take these guys seriously out in the real world after they leave?
I don't think anybody does.
And by the way, I thought Jake Tapper did a good job with Mnuchin pointing out.
Jake did a great job.
Ivanka Trump got patents from China after her father was president. Right. Oh, I'm sure China was giving out those patents.
And Kellyanne's hawking her polyester dresses from the North Lawn. Let me ask you about this idea of the prospect of an investigation. Yes. 3 former national security officials have told me that anybody can refer, again, this question for criminal investigation to the Justice Department, to the FBI or to prosecutors. How far can that get before Bill Barr snuffs it out like a candle?
So there's 2 different documents that Congress wants. One is the whistleblower complaint, and the other is the transcript of the conversation that the Ukrainian president had with Trump. They can claim executive privilege for that transcript, and they might have an argument that, the president should be able to talk to foreign leaders without it being disclosed. There is a crime fraud exception, so if the president is committing a crime, then ultimately that executive privilege would be defeated. But in terms of the complaint, the law is clear. Once the Inspector General certifies that it's an urgent matter of national security and the person who's making the complaint, the whistleblower, is credible, he gives that information to the head of the agency, in this case, the Director of National Intelligence. That person is an errand man. He's a messenger. His job is to walk that to Congress. And so when he doesn't do that on orders from the Trump administration, the other thing this has in common with the Mueller investigation is obstruction of justice.
Andy Carney, this was another weekend that I didn't remember a weekend since the Russia investigation was in full swing, where all 3 major newspapers, your newspaper, the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, on Saturday morning, on Monday morning, and I believe on Sunday morning, had front page stories about the Ukrainian scandal. How big is this story in terms of the resources being dedicated to getting at the truth of what transpired between Donald Trump and the leader of Ukraine?
I think this is potentially as big as we've seen yet. With this, unlike the story about Russia and collusion, as we've said on this program already, this story involves Donald Trump directly involved in in the phone call. He's on the phone call himself. It's not his son or his son-in-law in a meeting asking for dirt on a political opponent. This would imply that Donald Trump was involved himself. The outstanding question is, though, like we know, Donald Trump tends to not speak. He communicates between the lines. Is there really a direct ask, a direct quid pro quo? That's what we don't know yet, and that's what needs to be found out here. If so, this is a huge story, and as we've seen, Democrats who were sitting on the fence have moved further towards impeachment in the last few days. We've seen Schiff, we've seen Pelosi, we've seen their language changing. If this is just another case of it's close, but it doesn't quite connect the dots here, then we move along, and this was a 2-week news cycle. It's still too soon to say, but it's a big story that needs more reporting.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.